So Ivory, this is my challenge to you, going around asking about the language of Injil. And inshallah, we get to that. I am going around asking for the language in which the Torah was written. Please come, tell us which language it was. But until then, I will tell you what it was not. One of the setups for this conversation is a couple of weeks ago, this Ivory guy, he went to England. He went crazy all over the place. In which language was the Injil written? Which language? Which language? You see, he thinks as if we don't know. Our Quran tells us. You see in Surah Ibrahim, verse 4, if I'm not mistaken, it says we sent prophets in the language of their people that they may clearly understand them. Yeah? So already Quran told us in the language of his people. Now, how do we know what the people were talking about? Based on historical and objective extant evidence. For example, this evidence which is found in the Qumran community, they show us Paleo-Hebrew, Aramaic, and Hebrew. That means Aramaic existed at the time, Hebrew existed at the time. Yeah? So we can assume that this is the language where they spoke at the time, the language of his people. Now, today, we're going to talk about what they call the Torah. I want to ask Ivory, in which language was this Torah of yours written? Let's see if the Hebrew is the answer or not. Let's see if he does know which language they spoke at the time.
I'm actually quite interested now.
Let me start, inshallah. Page 1, at the start of Biblia Hebraica, which is an introduction what the Hebrew Bible is. At page 1, they say this: all the writings which come to us from antiquity, including the writings of Old and the New Testament, have suffered from misadventures. The interpreter of this material cannot proceed from assumptions. The text to be interpreted must first be established. It is not already defined. The available witnesses to the text must first be examined in order to reconstruct a single form of the text, which we can assert with confidence to be as close to the form of the autographs. So you see that before we start to say, oh, what does the text mean? Does it talk about Trinity or not? Does it talk about these miracles or not? Even before we start with that, we should know what the text is. This is very important. The textual witnesses are not all equally reliable. Each has its own character and its own individual history. We must be familiar with these if we hope to avoid inadequate or false solutions. You see that? So you have to know the history of the text before you go to interpret it, because otherwise, as this guy says, you will get false solutions. Now, what is the script of the Torah? If we ask them, they think is a given. It must have been Hebrew. It's Hebrew, they say. Let's see. So Ivory, this is my challenge to you, going around asking about the language of Injil. And inshallah, we get to that. I am going around asking for the language in which the Torah was written. Please come, tell us which language it was. But until then, I will tell you what it was not. You see? All the manuscripts and fragments of the Hebrew Old Testament, which have come down to us from Jewish sources, the earliest examples are this Qumran community text and the Nash Papyri, are with a few exceptions written in the script still used today, known as a square script, or the broken script, or the rigged script, or the Assyrian script. You see, this is how the Hebrew script is called. Square script, the Assyrian script, broken script. This is the name of the script of the Hebrews. And all the manuscripts which they have of the Old Testament comes in that script. Okay? Now, let's see what the script comes from. This script was derived by a gradual process of development from the Aramaic script, which was used extensively. The earliest recorded examples are the Araq al-Amir inscription in East Jordan, which is from 400 BC. This is the earliest attestation of Aramaic, 400 BC. The second one is the earliest Qumran community text, which is about 200 BC, 4Q Samuel Bay, and 4Q Jeremiah A. You see, these are the earliest Aramaic. So the Assyrian script can be divided in 3 periods. So the Hebrew script, in which they have the Old Testament in, can be divided in 3 periods. The first one, which is called the Archaic period, or the Archaic script, it is between 250 and 150 BCE. The second one is the Hasmonean script, which is from 150 BC until 30 BCE. Okay? And the last one is about 30 BCE until the 70 CE, which is also called the Herodian text. These are, by the way, many of them, for example, this Qumran community, for example, cloth and some of the fragments are confirmed by carbon dating, by the way. This is the oldest attestation of the Hebrew script, Akhi. The oldest attestation of the Hebrew script. Okay? Now, let me ask you, according to them, when did Moses live?
1100 BC?
It's about between 12 or 1300 BCE.
Okay.
Think about this. The earliest attestation of the Hebrew script goes only 3 centuries before Christ. Moses goes 13 centuries before Christ. So let's see which script was in use about the time when Moses supposedly is writing this for them. They tell us. See, they say, when the earliest parts of the Old Testament were first written down in the pre-exilic period, another script was in use in Palestine and in Syria. So Ivory, please come up and tell us in which script was the Torah written in. Surely it is not Hebrew. There is not one evidence that Hebrew existed. The earliest goes back to the Archaic period, which is about 300 BCE. So which language was it? In the time about 1100 BCE, we have evidence of the script which was used there. This was the Paleo-Phoenician script. Let me repeat it again. Paleo-Phoenician script. It is known to us in a later, more developed form in a series of texts, the earliest dating from the 11th century BCE. You see that? So from around the period of when Moses, according to them, supposedly lived, we have a script, we have actual extant evidence of that, we have epigraphical evidence. Let me give you a couple of them. The Albesedri Ostricon from Isbet Sarta. This is from the 11th century BC. Nothing in Hebrew. The Ahiram Sarcophagus from Byblos, which is about 1000 BC, is nothing in Hebrew. The farmer's calendar from Gezer is about 950 BCE, nothing in Hebrew. The Moabite stone, they be talking about the Moabite stone, is about 840 BC. You have the Ostraka from Samaria, 8th century BC. A palimpsest papyri from Morabaat, which is around the Jerusalem area, from the 8th century BCE. We have the Siloam inscription, 7th century BCE. All of them are in different script than the Hebrew. There is not one evidence that this Torah of theirs is written in Hebrew. They only have fragments of it in Hebrew. The language which existed at the time was Old Phoenician language. Hebrew did not even exist yet. As we heard, Akhi, Hebrew comes from Aramaic, and Aramaic, we can trace it back only to 400 BCE. So Ivory, let me ask you again, please, in which script was the Torah written in? Come up and tell us. Let's see. You see, they go on the...
You're saying that based on the evidence that's around, the Hebrew language did not even exist during the time of Moses at all. It was never there. So the question, or that's a question that I'm going to hold for later, then what language was the Torah revealed in would be the question that everyone would be asking. Because everyone assumes, I assumed before that it was always the Hebrew as well, initially. So it's not the case at all?
No, there is not one evidence of that. There is not one evidence that the Hebrew existed. And we know that this Hebrew script, which is the Assyrian script, Akhi, is a post-exilic script. It derives from Aramaic. How could it be that before the exile, the pre-exilic text was written in a language which derives from post-exilic period. See on the same page 1 of Biblia Hebraica, Ernst Woodbine, he says, the Jews' gradual adoption of Aramaic language, which was the lingua franca of ancient Near East, was followed by their adoption of Aramaic script, okay? And only eventually in the square script, which was developed from it. So this Hebrew script, which they are using today, developed from Aramaic text. How could the Torah be written in Hebrew? The first step was taken in the transition from the complex writing system with 100 letters of alphabet to the simplest forms of writings, which only has 22 odd letters, a step so significant for human intellectual history. Do you hear that? So the language which existed at the time when the Torah was written had about 100 letters in their alphabet. Akhi, think about it. You have a text, and that text uses about 100 letters to give you the message. Later on, what we have today is a transmission of that alphabet, which has 100 letters, into a language which only has 22 letters in the alphabet. That means about 80% of these letters are lost in translation. And we know that Hebrew already is the fourth translation from this, at least the fourth. You see? I will get to it, inshallah, but let me give you a simple recap about it. So the evidence is the oldest script which they can find, Akhi, about the time is Old Phoenician. After that comes Aramaic. After that, Paleo-Hebrew. And after that, the Assyrian script, but they have today. So the Torah, which they say the original language, the law of the best evidence, which they will use, they say Syrian script, the Hebrew script, it did not exist at the time. Who says that? Everybody knows the Torah is written in Hebrew. Everybody knows that. It's common sense. Why are you going against the grain? They say to me, Akhi. Let me see. The Jews were aware that the script was not their earliest. Do you hear that? The Jews already are aware that this Hebrew script which they have, this Assyrian script which they have, the broken script which they have, is not their earliest. One Jewish tradition attributes its introduction to Ezra about 400 BC. And we know about the time of Ezra, yes, Aramaic existed. So you see, they only can trace it back at the time of Ezra, not at the time of Moses. You see that? The later rabbis, you see, this is what Ernst Woodbine on page 2 says. The later rabbis were embarrassed by the implication that it was a post-exilic innovation. You see that? So the Hebrew language, when they say, oh, the Torah is written in, is the original language, is a post-exilic innovation, is a bid'ah. You see, he says that. But let me read on. Accordingly, they told how the Torah was first given in the Hebrew script. So they say when Moses got it, he got it in Hebrew script, this Assyrian script, okay? But because of Israel's sin, the script had been changed. And then Ezra, about 400 BCE, he came with the original language and restored it. Do you hear that? So they say because the Jews were sinful, God changed the script of the Torah. Think about that. Sanhedrin 22a for everybody to go see. There is nothing about Dawa script and nothing. It is them Jewish traditions who are giving you this text, and they be telling you, yes, the scripts which we have goes only back to Ezra. Erdmustbein cites, although this was obviously a special pleading and without any historical value, it clearly reflects the awareness of a change of script in post-exilic period. So already the Torah which they have in this Hebrew script is not the original script. Ivory, please tell us in which script was the Torah written in. Surely it was not Hebrew. So please tell us. I will ask you again. You see, Emmanuel Tov, on page 219 of second edition Baptism of the Hebrew Bible, page 219, he says, in any event, all text Akhi, all text written in the square script necessarily reflects a relatively late stage of writing. You see that? They be telling us Hebrew is not the original script.
And this is wild. Like, this is like no one knows this stuff.
People know it, but these pastors, these theologians, for some reason, don't talk about this. But this information is available for people who read some books. You see, he goes on page 3 of his Biblia Hebraica, the introduction of the translation from the old Hebrew script to the square script occurred between 4th and the 2nd century BC. 4th and 2nd century BC. It is impossible to be more precise. Among the texts found in the Dead Sea caves are some written in Paleo-Hebrew, and he gives the list of it. So think about it. They say we cannot go back before 400 BC. Think about that. And when we talk about the text of Musa alayhi salam, which we say is a pre-exilic text, man, what does that have anything to do with this Hebrew text which you are presenting us? Right? But sure, by the way, our beloved brother of us, which I get more respect every day, one of them is Bassam, he already knows it. But Eminem said something a couple of years ago. He was searching for books which go back about 100 years ago.
Sorry, 1 second, Ali, 1 second.
200 years ago. You remember that, Akhi? He was searching for such books. One of them, which I came across a couple of days ago in preparation of this, Akhi, is a guy named Shemaryahu Talmon. He has a couple of books, Akhi, about the text and script of this. And I just started with that, so I don't go to this study. But Emmanuel Tov is quoting it, and also Ernst Wurtwein. Then people are quoting him. He has responded, they say, to explain satisfactorily the plurality of the text at the end of the pre-Christian era. Pre-Christian era. He regards these as texts which circulated in various social and religious groups, that there were yet other forms of the text which have disappeared along with the groups they served. You see that? So there are texts which have disappeared, and he says the problem is not one of the text types, is not a recension. The problem is of independent text. So Akhi, think about it. They say, oh, the Jews always had the same text. Oh, they have the tradition. I will get to that tradition, by the way. But until now, ivory, in which script was the Torah written in? We all see them people are telling us this Hebrew of yours doesn't go back before 400 BC. Moses goes back before 400 BC. Come with one evidence of Hebrew of the time. Your Hebrew, as Emmanuel Tov says, in any event, he says, all texts written in the square script necessarily reflect a relatively late stage of writing. Okay, Akhi, this is the first stage which I was talking about the script and the pre-exilic text. And surely it was not Hebrew or the Assyrian or the broken script which they have. And them rabbis already are telling us this is by Ezra. This is by Ezra. Do we believe in the Torah of Ezra, or do we believe in the Torah of Musa alayhi salam? Right? They come with this Hebrew script and they say you should believe in this. Your Quran is confirming this.